Welcome back, fourth graders. I hope you had a great weekend and found a good story to read and get into. Maybe you checked out a book from our libraries at our schools, or maybe you have a book around your house, or maybe you went on Epic for a little while and found a good story there to read. But for us, we're going to continue on looking at different kinds of stories. We know that word we had last week, we can't forget about, the word genre. All stories fit within some sort of genre. It's like a category. It's like what books belong to what kind of category. So we had the fiction books, remember, the ones that are not true, and the nonfiction books, the ones that are true. And we didn't want to forget about the fiction because we're going to come back to those, but we really zoomed in mostly with nonfiction last week. We talked about the things in nonfiction books that help us to understand what they're about. They were called text features, like captions and glossaries, photographs, maps, things like that you found within your nonfiction readings. Well, today we're going to zoom in even more. We're going to zoom in on the second of those genres in our nonfiction side. It's called a biography. And we're going to use a biography to help us understand what things are true within that story and what are the main ideas, the things in that story that make it true, and what is it mainly about? What is the author telling us? What are they trying to get across? What are the main ideas of that person's life? And so we're going to zoom in. If you remember this chart too, this chart we had last week, so we're going to zoom in on that square up there that has the picture of Abraham Lincoln. So it's a story about a real person's life. That's what a biography is. In this case, Abraham Lincoln, a real person, and the things about his life. So this week, as we work on biographies, we're also going to work on main ideas. Things within that biography that make it true, that are the main ideas. What's the author trying to tell us about that person's life? But it fits within, we can't forget all of this other stuff that we've already talked about. It's a genre, it's in the nonfiction side, so it's true and it's real, and it's called a biography. All right, let's go see what Honey Rose is reading. Honey Rose, I love your baseball cap. Did you find a good story today to read? Is that a story about a baseball player? It is, Honey Rose. It's a real story about a real person. You found a biography. Way to go, Honey Rose. Let's see what you found. So this is the story that Honey Rose found. It's a biography because it's about a real person, in this case, a baseball player, which is why she was looking for a baseball cap to wear, but she didn't quite have the right team. She found her Minnesota Twins cap, which she loves to cheer for the Twins. But the player that we're looking at in this biography, he played for a team called the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's where you see that letter P on his hat. And he was a very famous baseball player back quite a few years ago. His name was Roberto Clemente. And I notice in this page that they use a nonfiction text feature. They put a photograph of his actual playing card, his baseball card in there. So it gives us more information about this person, this real person, Roberto Clemente. And if you look over on this side, they have some other nonfiction text features. I look here and I see, oh wow, that looks like the actual baseball bat of Roberto Clemente. Sure enough, there's his signature. And a baseball down at the bottom, so another text feature down there has a baseball picture. So that we know, wow, this story is going to be about a baseball player, a famous baseball player. It's a biography, a real story about a real person. Now, if you look at the top, the first paragraph talks about Roberto Clemente as a small boy. Listen along as I read this. It says, Roberto Clemente was a small boy in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico? I wonder where that is. I wonder if that's another state like Minnesota, or maybe it's a city like Shakopee. When Roberto Clemente was a small boy in Puerto Rico, long before he ever dreamed of becoming a great baseball player, just having a baseball was important. Not many boys had real baseballs, white and round and firm with neat stitches along the seams. Now let's think about this. When he was a small boy in Puerto Rico, just having a baseball was important. If I turn to the next page, I see another nonfiction text feature. I see a map. This is going to help us understand about Puerto Rico. So there's Florida down at the bottom of the United States. And off of Florida, there's some islands. And sure enough, there's Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico, it's an island off of the United States, off of Florida. And I bet on this page of the story, they probably tell us a little bit about Puerto Rico. Sure enough, Puerto Rico is one of the islands that stretch out like stepping stones from the southern tip of Florida into the warm blue sea. So there's a lot of text features in nonfiction stories that help us to understand what it's about and what's happening. As we look at Roberto Clemente, we're going to start with this first paragraph, this first little piece, and we're going to talk about something called main idea. A main idea is what is mostly in that paragraph or in that first section. What is it mostly about? What are they trying to tell us? It's the main meaning mostly. Main, mostly, what is it mostly about? It's mostly about this, or it's mostly about that. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can figure out what's the main idea, and those are the things we'll talk about these next few days. What helps us to know, yep, that's the main idea, not this. All right. So you can see Honey Rose started a new page in her reader's notebook. She titled it Main Idea, and she started to write in there what a main idea is. This is a good idea for you as well. Have your reader's notebooks and make a page here about main idea. She put down that the main idea of a nonfiction text is the main point that the author is trying to tell the reader. The main point. What is the author trying to tell me? Well, she goes on to say, how can I find the main idea? That's a pretty good question. How can I go ahead and find it? All right, I know what it is. It's the main point, but how can I find it? Looks like she's started a list here. She's going to focus on just one for today, the first one with that yellow star. It says, ask yourself this question. What is this paragraph or section mostly about? Okay. So if I go back in my reading and I look at this first section about Roberto Clemente is a small boy in Puerto Rico, well, it talks mostly about baseballs. I mean, if I were to keep going, long before he ever dreamed of becoming a great baseball player, just having a baseball was important. Not many boys had real baseballs, white and round and firm with neat stitches along the seams. Roberto and his friends made their own baseballs. They would find an old golf ball. That would be the center. And then they would get some string and wind it around the golf ball and tape it all together. So the main idea, the thing that is mostly talking about, it's mostly talking about how Roberto Clemente, just having a baseball was important. So if they didn't have a lot of baseballs or even a baseball to play with, they probably didn't have a lot of money or a lot of materials or things around them like we are used to. You just go into a store and buy a baseball. So just having a baseball, that seems like that's kind of the main idea here, that just having a baseball was important. Roberto Clemente, growing up, he had to make his own baseballs. So the main idea of that first paragraph is Roberto Clemente didn't even have a baseball growing up, and so he had to make his own. Mostly this paragraph, this first section, is about that. And it keeps on going too. Talks more about making baseballs. So if I were to say what the main point is, I'd probably say the main idea is Roberto Clemente didn't even have a baseball, nor did his other friends. so they had to make their own. Well, today you're going to get a paragraph of this story, Roberto Clemente, and you're going to read that paragraph and try to figure out what you think the main idea would be. As you read that, ask yourself this question: what is this paragraph or section mostly about? We're going to use that to help us today to try to find the main idea of a section of our story about Roberto. All right. Good luck, and we will see you tomorrow.